The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Ravens Hollow as 16-year-old Emma clutched her worn leather satchel tighter against her chest. The market square buzzed with its usual activity, but something felt different today. Her stepfather's angry words from the night before still echoed in her mind, and the bruise on her arm throbbed beneath her long sleeves. She had been living with her stepfather Marcus for 3 years now, ever since her mother passed away from the fever. What started as occasional harsh words had gradually escalated into something much darker. Marcus owned a small tavern on the outskirts of town, and his drinking had gotten worse with each passing month. The customers had begun to dwindle, and with them his temper had shortened considerably. Emma tried to blend into the crowd as she made her way through the market, hoping to remain invisible. She had learned that drawing attention to herself often led to trouble at home. Her destination was the baker's shop, where she worked 3 days a week kneading dough and serving customers. The job barely paid enough to contribute to household expenses, but it gave her a few precious hours away from Marcus's watchful and increasingly violent gaze. As she walked past the fountain in the center of the square, Emma noticed the royal guard stationed at various points around the marketplace. King Aldrich had increased security in recent weeks due to rumors of unrest in neighboring kingdoms. The guards stood tall in their deep blue uniforms, their silver badges gleaming in the morning light. Most people gave them a wide berth, intimidated by their serious expressions and the weapons at their sides. One guard in particular caught Emma's attention. He stood near the flower vendor's stall, his dark hair visible beneath his ceremonial helmet. Unlike the others, he seemed to actually observe the people around him rather than simply scanning for obvious threats. When an elderly woman dropped her basket of apples, he immediately stepped forward to help her gather them, his kind smile transforming his stern features entirely. Emma found herself stealing glances at him throughout the morning as she went about her errands. There was something reassuring about his presence, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. She learned from the flower vendor that his name was Captain James Whitmore, and he had been serving the royal family for nearly 8 years. The vendor spoke highly of him, mentioning how he always treated everyone with respect regardless of their social standing. The morning passed peacefully enough, but Emma's sense of unease grew as the time approached for her to return home. Marcus had given her a list of items to purchase from the market, and she dreaded facing his inspection of everything she bought. He had a way of finding fault with her choices, whether the bread was too expensive or the vegetables not fresh enough. These criticisms usually led to punishment of one form or another. As she gathered the last items on her list, Emma's hands began to tremble slightly. The sun was reaching its peak, which meant Marcus would expect her back soon. He became particularly volatile when kept waiting, especially if he had started drinking early in the day. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself, knowing that showing fear would only make things worse when she arrived home. Walking past Captain Whitmore's position one final time, Emma felt an almost overwhelming urge to approach him. Something in his demeanor suggested he might actually listen if someone needed help. But what could she possibly say? That her stepfather had been increasingly cruel? That she feared what might happen when she returned home? Such problems seemed too small and personal to bother a royal guard with, especially one whose job was to protect the entire kingdom. Instead, she lowered her head and continued walking toward the edge of the market square. As she passed by him, their eyes met briefly. In that moment, Emma saw something in his gaze that gave her a glimmer of hope. It was recognition, not of her specifically, but of someone in distress. Captain Whitmore had seen enough of the world to recognize the signs of fear and desperation, even when someone was trying their best to hide them. The interaction lasted only a few seconds, but it planted a seed in Emma's mind. Maybe, just maybe, there were people in the world who would help someone like her if they knew what was happening. The thought both terrified and comforted her as she made her way through the winding streets toward home. The tavern came into view sooner than she would have liked. Even from a distance, she could see Marcus standing in the doorway, his arms crossed and his face already showing signs of displeasure. Her steps slowed involuntarily, and she found herself wishing she could turn around and run back to the safety of the market square, where Captain Whitmore stood guard. But running was not an option. She had learned long ago that avoiding Marcus only made his anger worse when she eventually had to face him. Taking a deep breath, Emma straightened her shoulders and prepared to endure whatever awaited her. As she approached the tavern, she clutched the memory of the kind captain's eyes, hoping that someday she might find the courage to seek the help she so desperately needed. The door creaked as she pushed it open, and Marcus's voice immediately filled the air with its familiar harsh tone. Emma stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and prepared for another day of walking on eggshells around the man who was supposed to protect her, but had instead become her greatest source of fear. The days following Emma's encounter in the market square passed slowly, each one bringing new challenges at home. Marcus's drinking had increased noticeably, and with it came longer periods of unpredictable mood swings. Emma had learned to read the signs, the way he held his shoulders when he was building toward an explosion, the particular tone his voice took when he was looking for reasons to be angry, and most importantly, when it was safest to make herself scarce. 3 days after, seeing Captain Whitmore at the market, Emma found herself facing one of Marcus's worst episodes yet. She had returned from her work at the bakery to find him in a rage about missing money from the tavern's cash box. The accusations flew fast and harsh, each one more unreasonable than the last. Emma tried to explain that she had been at work all day and had witnesses to prove it, but Marcus was beyond listening to reason. The confrontation escalated quickly. Marcus grabbed Emma's arm with enough force to leave fingerprint bruises, shaking her while demanding she confess to stealing from him. When she continued to maintain her innocence, his other hand rose threateningly. Emma instinctively flinched and pulled away, which only seemed to fuel his anger further. For the first time since her mother's death, Emma seriously feared for her safety. The look in Marcus's eyes was different this time, more dangerous and completely disconnected from reality. She realized that he was so consumed by alcohol and rage that he might actually seriously hurt her without even realizing what he was doing. That night, after Marcus had finally passed out in his chair, Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about Captain Whitmore. She remembered the way he had helped the elderly woman with her apples, the genuine kindness in his eyes, and how safe she had felt just being near him. For the first time, she began to seriously consider asking for help. The next morning brought no relief. Marcus woke up with a terrible headache and an even worse temper. He seemed to have no memory of the previous night's violence, but he was clearly looking for someone to blame for his misery. Emma tried to stay out of his way, but in the small space above the tavern where they lived, avoiding him completely was impossible. When it came time for her to leave for the market to buy supplies for the tavern, Emma felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Being away from Marcus was always a blessing, but she knew she would have to return eventually. As she walked through the familiar streets, she found herself hoping desperately that Captain Whitmore would be on duty in the square again. Her heart lifted when she spotted his familiar figure near the fountain. He was speaking with another guard, but something about his posture suggested he was alert to everything happening around him. Emma went about her shopping, but she kept glancing in his direction, trying to work up the courage to approach him. The opportunity came when she was leaving the spice merchant's stall. A group of rowdy young men had been drinking despite the early hour, and they were becoming increasingly aggressive with the female shoppers. Emma tried to avoid them, but one of them noticed her and began making crude comments about her appearance. P.O. Situation escalated quickly when one of the men grabbed Emma's basket, spilling its contents across the cobblestones. When she bent to gather her scattered purchases, another man made a grab for her, his intentions clearly inappropriate and threatening. Emma's fear spiked, but before she could even call out, Captain Whitmore appeared beside her. His presence immediately changed the dynamic of the situation. The drunk men who had been so bold moments before suddenly found themselves face to face with a royal guard who stood several inches taller than any of them and carried the authority of the crown. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable edge of warning as he ordered them to move along. The men grumbled but complied, clearly unwilling to face the consequences of challenging a member of the royal guard. Captain Whitmore helped Emma gather her scattered items, his movements gentle and respectful. When he handed her the last of her purchases, their eyes met again, and Emma saw the same kindness she had noticed before. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, quietly, his voice carrying genuine concern. Emma shook her head, but her hands were still trembling slightly. She wanted to tell him that the drunk men were the least of her problems, that she faced far worse at home every day, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. How could she explain her situation to this distinguished man who served royalty? "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible above the noise of the market. Captain Whitmore studied her face for a moment, and Emma had the distinct impression that he was seeing more than she was saying. His next words confirmed her suspicion. "Sometimes the dangers we face in quiet places are worse than the ones we encounter in public," he said carefully, his tone suggesting he was offering more than just casual conversation. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Somehow, this stranger had seen through her careful facade and recognized her distress. She looked into his eyes and saw not judgment or pity, but genuine concern and a willingness to help. For a moment she considered telling him everything about Marcus, about the escalating violence, about her fear of what might happen next. But fear held her back. What if Marcus found out she had spoken to someone? What if Captain Whitmore didn't believe her, or worse, what if he did nothing to help? If he did, the risk seemed enormous, and she was not yet desperate enough to take it. Instead, she simply nodded, acknowledging his words without committing to anything more. Captain Whitmore seemed to understand her hesitation. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small piece of parchment, writing something on it quickly. "If you ever need assistance," he said, pressing the paper into her hand, "this is where you can find me or leave a message. Sometimes help is closer than we think." Emma clutched the paper tightly, feeling as though she had been given a lifeline. She thanked him again and hurried away, her mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Emma kept Captain Whitmore's note hidden in the lining of her dress, checking periodically to make sure it was still there. The small piece of parchment had become her most precious possession, representing hope in a situation that seemed increasingly hopeless. She had read the address he had written dozens of times, memorizing every curve of his careful handwriting. 2 weeks passed, and Marcus's behavior continued to deteriorate. The tavern was losing customers at an alarming rate, partly because of his increasingly erratic behavior, and partly because word had spread about his drinking problem. With less money coming in, his frustration grew exponentially, and Emma bore the brunt of his anger. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Emma had spent the day at the bakery and returned home to find Marcus in the middle of a heated argument with his last remaining regular customer. The man was demanding his money back after Marcus had served him spoiled ale, but Marcus was too drunk and proud to admit his mistake. When the customer finally left in disgust, Marcus turned his fury on Emma. In his twisted logic, she was somehow responsible for the tavern's problems. Maybe she was stealing from him, or perhaps she was deliberately sabotaging his business. The accusations were wild and completely unfounded, but Marcus was beyond caring about logic or evidence. The violence that night was worse than anything Emma had experienced before. Marcus's rage seemed to have no bounds, and for the first time, Emma genuinely feared he might kill her. When she finally managed to escape to her small room and barricade the door, she was shaking uncontrollably and nursing several painful injuries. As she sat on her narrow bed in the darkness, listening to Marcus ranting and throwing things around the main room, Emma realized she could not continue living this way. The next escalation might be her last, and she was finally desperate enough to risk asking for help. The next morning, Marcus was passed out on the tavern floor, surrounded by broken bottles and overturned furniture. Emma cleaned up the mess as quietly as possible, gathered her few precious belongings, and slipped out of the building. She had never been to the address Captain Whitmore had given her, but she had studied the street map in the baker's shop enough times to know how to find it. The Royal Guard barracks were located in a stone building near the castle walls. Emma had never been so close to the seat of royal power, and under other circumstances she might have been intimidated by the grandeur of the architecture. Today, however, her desperation overrode her nervousness. A guard at the entrance asked her business, and Emma's carefully rehearsed words tumbled out in a rush. She explained that Captain Whitmore had told her she could leave a message for him, and she desperately needed his help. The guard looked skeptical at first, but something in Emma's appearance and demeanor must have convinced him of her sincerity. After what felt like an eternity, Captain Whitmore appeared at the entrance. He was out of uniform, wearing simple civilian clothes, but his presence still commanded respect. When he saw Emma's condition, his expression immediately became serious and concerned. "What happened?" he asked gently, guiding her to a bench in a quiet courtyard behind the barracks. For the first time in 3 years, Emma told someone the complete truth about her situation. The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam, carrying with them all the fear, pain, and desperation she had been holding inside. She told him about Marcus's drinking, about the escalating violence, about her mother's death, and how she had nowhere else to go. Captain Whitmore listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as Emma's story unfolded. When she finished speaking, they sat in silence for several minutes while he processed what she had told him. "You cannot go back there," he said finally, his voice firm but kind. "Not today, not ever. But I have nowhere else to go," Emma replied, voicing the fear that had kept her trapped for so long. "I have no family, no money, no skills except what I learned at the bakery." Captain Whitmore was quiet for another moment, clearly thinking through the options. Emma watched his face, hoping desperately that he would not simply send her back to Marcus with advice to be more careful. "There are places for people in your situation," he said finally. "The church runs a house for women and children who need sanctuary. They would take you in, help you get back on your feet, and ensure that Marcus could not reach you there." The relief Emma felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly followed by a new fear. What if he comes looking for me? What if he finds out where I am? Captain Whitmore's expression became grim and determined. "Marcus will not be a problem," he said with quiet authority. "I will personally ensure that he understands the consequences of pursuing you or trying to cause you any further harm." Emma stared at him, hardly daring to believe that her nightmare might actually be ending. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You barely know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Captain Whitmore replied simply. "And because everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. You've shown tremendous courage in coming forward, Emma. Now let me help you take the next step." Over the next hour, Captain Whitmore made arrangements that would have taken Emma weeks to figure out on her own. He sent a message to the church sanctuary, spoke with the head baker about continuing Emma's employment, and even arranged for someone to discreetly retrieve her remaining belongings from the tavern. As they prepared to leave for the sanctuary, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long was finally beginning to fade, replaced by something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. "There's just one thing," Captain Whitmore said as they walked toward the church. "Marcus will eventually realize you're not coming back. When he does, he's likely to cause trouble. I'll handle the situation, but you need to be prepared for the possibility that he might try to find you." Emma nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. But for the first time in years, she was not facing her problems alone. The sanctuary proved to be everything Captain Whitmore had promised and more. Sister Margaret, the elderly woman who ran the facility, welcomed Emma with open arms and asked no uncomfortable questions about her past. The building itself was modest, but clean and warm, housing a dozen other women and children who had found themselves in similar desperate circumstances. For the first time in 3 years, Emma slept through an entire night without waking in fear. The small room she shared with another young woman named Sarah felt like a palace compared to the cramped space above Marcus's tavern. More importantly, she felt safe. The sanctuary had rules and routines, but they were designed to protect and support the residents rather than control and intimidate them. Emma quickly settled into the rhythm of sanctuary life. She continued working at the bakery, but now the wages she earned were hers to keep and save rather than being handed over to Marcus. Sister Margaret helped her open an account at the local bank, something Marcus had never allowed her to do, claiming she was too irresponsible to manage money. 3 days after Emma's arrival at the sanctuary, Captain Whitmore came to check on her progress. He looked pleased to see the improvement in her appearance and demeanor. The constant tension that had marked her features was beginning to fade, replaced by a cautious but growing sense of peace. "How are you adjusting?" he asked as they walked in the sanctuary's small garden. "Better than I ever imagined possible," Emma replied honestly. "I keep expecting something terrible to happen, but every morning I wake up and remember that I'm safe here." Captain Whitmore nodded approvingly. "That feeling will fade with time. Your mind needs time to adjust to the absence of constant threat. What are your plans for the future?" Emma had been thinking about this question constantly since arriving at the sanctuary. "I want to learn to read and write properly," she said. "Sister Margaret has offered to teach me, and she says there are opportunities for educated women in the city. Maybe someday I could work as a clerk or even teach children." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another guard, who approached them with obvious urgency. Emma's heart began to race, fearing that somehow Marcus had found her location. "Captain," the young guard said breathlessly, "there's been trouble at the old tavern on Millfield Street. The owner is causing quite a disturbance, demanding information about a missing girl. He's drunk and becoming increasingly violent with anyone who won't help him." Captain Whitmore's expression hardened immediately. "How long has this been going on?" "Started this morning, sir. He's been going from business to business, accusing people of hiding the girl from him. The local merchants are getting scared, and someone needs to handle the situation before it gets worse." Emma felt the familiar cold fear settle in her stomach. Marcus had realized she was gone, and now he was looking for her. She had known this moment would come, but she was not prepared for how terrifying it would feel. Captain Whitmore noticed her distress immediately. "Emma," he said firmly, "you are safe here. Marcus cannot reach you in the sanctuary, and I will not allow him to continue terrorizing innocent people while searching for you." He turned to the younger guard. "Gather 2 more men and meet me at the barracks in 10 minutes. We'll handle this situation directly." After the guard left, Captain Whitmore spent several more minutes reassuring Emma that she had nothing to fear. "This is exactly why I wanted you somewhere safe before confronting Marcus," he explained. "Desperate men often become dangerous when they realize they've lost control." "What will you do?" Emma asked, dreading the answer. "I'll explain to Marcus that you are under the protection of the Crown, and that any further attempts to locate or contact you will be considered a criminal offense. If he's too drunk or stubborn to understand reason, we'll help him understand in other ways." Emma watched Captain Whitmore stride purposefully toward the barracks, his military bearing evident in every step. She felt guilty that he was risking potential confrontation because of her situation, but she also felt profoundly grateful to have someone willing to stand between her and Marcus's rage. The next few hours passed slowly. Emma tried to focus on her daily tasks at the sanctuary, but her mind kept wandering to whatever confrontation was taking place across town. Sister Margaret noticed her distress and sat with her during the afternoon, sharing tea and quiet conversation that helped calm Emma's nerves. It was nearly evening when Captain Whitmore returned to the sanctuary. Emma could tell immediately from his expression that the situation had been resolved, though not without difficulty. "Marcus will not be bothering you anymore," he announced without preamble. However, the confrontation was more challenging than I had hoped. Emma's eyes widened with concern. "Was anyone hurt?" "Marcus was too drunk to be rational," Captain Whitmore explained. "When we arrived at his tavern, he was already in a rage and accused us of conspiring to steal his property. He seemed to believe that you belonged to him and that we had no right to interfere in what he called family matters." "What happened?" "We gave him every opportunity to listen to reason," Captain Whitmore continued. "I explained that you are an adult with the right to choose where you live, and that his treatment of you had been reported to the authorities. I warned him that any further attempts to locate or harass you would result in serious legal consequences." Emma held her breath, waiting for the rest of the story. "Marcus chose to respond by attacking one of my men with a broken bottle," Captain Whitmore said grimly. "At that point, We had no choice but to physically restrain him. He's currently in the city jail, where he'll remain until he sobers up and appears before a magistrate. Relief washed over Emma so powerfully that she felt dizzy. Is it really over? This chapter is over, Captain Whitmore confirmed. Marcus will face charges for attacking a royal guard, and part of his sentence will likely include a prohibition against contacting you. But more importantly, Emma, you've proven that you have the strength to escape a terrible situation and build a new life. That courage will serve you well in whatever comes next. 6 months after the confrontation with Marcus, Emma's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The sanctuary had become her launching pad, rather than just her refuge, and with Sister Margaret's patient teaching, she had learned to read and write with remarkable speed. Her natural intelligence, so long suppressed by fear and circumstances, began to flourish in the safety of her new environment. The bakery owner, Mrs. Henderson, had been so impressed with Emma's dedication and honesty that she offered her additional responsibilities managing the shop's accounts. Emma discovered she had a natural talent for numbers and organization, skills that proved increasingly valuable as Mrs. Henderson's business grew. Captain Whitmore had become a regular visitor to the sanctuary, checking on Emma's progress and gradually becoming something approaching a friend. Their relationship was built on mutual respect rather than the desperation that had brought them together, and Emma found herself looking forward to their conversations about books, current events, and her dreams for the future. One afternoon, in early autumn, Captain Whitmore arrived at the sanctuary with unusual news. He found Emma in the garden where she had been reading to some of the younger children who lived there temporarily with their mothers. "I have an interesting proposition for you," he said after the children had run off to play. "The royal household is looking for someone to assist with correspondence and record-keeping. It's a position that would use your reading and writing skills, and it comes with a good salary and living quarters in the castle complex." Emma stared at him in amazement. "You're suggesting I could work at the castle? For the royal family?" "The position is with the administrative staff, not the royal family directly," Captain Whitmore clarified. "But yes, you would be working within the castle walls. The head clerk specifically requested someone intelligent and trustworthy, and I immediately thought of you. The opportunity seemed too good to be true." Emma had dreamed of finding meaningful work, but she had never dared to imagine anything as prestigious as a position at the royal castle. At the same time, the prospect was somewhat intimidating. "Would I be qualified for such work?" she asked, uncertainly. "I've only been reading and writing for a few months." "Your skills have developed remarkably quickly," Captain Whitmore assured her. "More importantly, you have qualities that cannot be taught: honesty, reliability, and the ability to work well with others. The head clerk values those traits above formal education." Emma spent several days considering the offer, discussing it with Sister Margaret and the other women at the sanctuary. Everyone encouraged her to pursue the opportunity, recognizing it as a chance for long-term stability and career advancement that few people in her position would ever receive. The interview process was nerve-wracking, but ultimately successful. Master Thomas, the head clerk, was a kindly man in his 50s, who seemed more interested in Emma's character than her credentials. He gave her several practical tests involving copying documents and organizing files, all of which she completed successfully. "Captain Whitmore speaks very highly of you," Master Thomas said at the conclusion of the interview. "He tells me you've overcome significant challenges to reach this point in your life. I admire that kind of determination." Emma was offered the position immediately, with the understanding that she would begin work the following week. The salary was more than double what she had been earning at the bakery, and the living quarters provided were a small but comfortable apartment within the castle's residential wing. As she prepared to leave the sanctuary, Emma felt a mixture of excitement and sadness. The place had been her salvation, and the women she had lived with had become like family. Sister Margaret organized a small farewell celebration, and Emma promised to visit regularly and to help other women who might find themselves in similar situations. Captain Whitmore offered to escort her to her new quarters on her first day of work, a gesture that Emma greatly appreciated. As they walked through the castle grounds, he provided a running commentary on the various buildings and their purposes. "This is quite different from the market square where we first met," Emma observed, still somewhat awed by her surroundings. "You've come a long way from that frightened girl who was afraid to ask for help," Captain Whitmore replied. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished." Emma's first day at work went smoothly. Master Thomas introduced her to the other clerks, showed her the filing systems, and gave her several straightforward assignments to help her get oriented. The work was challenging but engaging, and Emma found herself genuinely enjoying the intellectual stimulation. Over the following weeks, Emma settled into her new routine with surprising ease. She discovered that her experiences had given her a unique ability to understand and empathize with people from all walks of life, a skill that proved valuable when dealing with various petitioners and visitors to the castle. Her colleagues quickly came to respect her work ethic and reliability. Emma never missed a day, always completed her assignments on time, and volunteered for additional responsibilities whenever possible. Master Thomas began giving her increasingly complex projects, and Emma proved herself capable of handling them all. One evening, as Emma was walking through the castle courtyard after a particularly satisfying day at work, she encountered Captain Whitmore finishing his own duties. They fell into step together, their friendship now comfortable and established. "Do you ever regret leaving your old life behind?" he asked, a question that had clearly been on his mind. Emma considered the question seriously. "I regret that it took me so long to ask for help," she said finally. "I wasted years being afraid when I could have been building the life I have now, but I don't regret leaving Marcus in that situation. The only thing I regret is not trusting my instincts sooner." As they reached the entrance to her residential wing, Emma paused to look back at the courtyard where they had been walking. The castle grounds were peaceful in the evening light, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the chain of events that had brought her to this place. "Thank you," she said to Captain Whitmore, words that carried the weight of everything he had made possible. "Thank you for having the courage to ask for help," he replied. "Not everyone can do that, even when they desperately need to." 2 years after beginning her work at the castle, Emma had become one of Master Thomas's most trusted assistants. Her responsibilities had expanded far beyond simple filing and correspondence, and she now managed several important administrative functions for the royal household. The shy, frightened girl who had once been afraid to speak up for herself had evolved into a confident young woman who commanded respect throughout the castle. Emma's apartment had gradually filled with books, a luxury she had never been able to afford before. She spent her evenings reading about history, literature, and current affairs, educating herself in subjects she had never had the opportunity to study. Her conversations with Captain Whitmore had evolved to cover complex topics ranging from politics to philosophy, and she found herself contributing insights that surprised even her. The relationship between Emma and Captain Whitmore had also evolved over time. What had begun as a rescue had grown into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. They often walked together in the castle gardens after their respective workdays ended, discussing everything from daily concerns to long-term dreams. One spring evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the rose garden, Captain Whitmore brought up a subject that had been weighing on his mind for some time. "Emma," he began carefully, "I've been thinking about something and I wanted to discuss it with you. Master Thomas has mentioned that he's considering retirement within the next few years. He's been training you to potentially take over many of his responsibilities." Emma nodded. She had sensed that Master Thomas was preparing her for greater leadership, and the prospect both excited and intimidated her. "He's been an excellent mentor. I never imagined I could be capable of such work when I first arrived here." "That's exactly what I wanted to talk about," Captain Whitmore continued. "Your transformation has been remarkable, but I think there's something else you should consider. There's a new program being established to help people who have escaped dangerous situations, similar to what you experienced. The Royal Council has approved funding for counselors and advocates who can work with the church and local authorities to identify and assist people in need." Emma's interest was immediately piqued. "What kind of work would this involve?" Program would need someone to coordinate between the various organizations, manage resources, and most importantly, talk to people who are afraid to seek help. Someone who understands what they're going through because they've been there themselves. The idea resonated deeply with Emma. She had often thought about other people who might be trapped in situations similar to what she had escaped, wondering if they even knew that help was available. Her own experience had shown her how difficult it could be to reach out, even when the alternative was continuing to suffer. "Would this be instead of my work with Master Thomas?" she asked. "That would be your choice," Captain Whitmore replied. "Master Thomas and I have discussed this, and he believes you could handle both responsibilities, at least initially. The coordination work wouldn't require full-time attention, especially in the beginning." Over the following weeks, Emma threw herself into learning about the proposed program. She met with Sister Margaret and other sanctuary operators, spoke with guards and magistrates about how they encountered people in dangerous domestic situations, and researched how similar programs operated in neighboring kingdoms. What she discovered was both encouraging and sobering. There were indeed many people trapped in situations like the one she had escaped, but reaching them required a careful approach that balanced offering help with respecting people's autonomy to make their own decisions. Emma developed a proposal for a network that would train people in various professions to recognize signs of domestic violence and abuse, provide them with resources for helping victims, and create safe pathways for people to seek assistance without fear of retaliation. When she presented her proposal to the Royal Council, Emma felt nervous but determined. She had prepared thoroughly and believed deeply in the importance of the work. The council members listened attentively as she outlined her ideas, asking thoughtful questions about implementation and funding. Lord Chancellor Aldwin, the King's chief advisor, was particularly interested in Emma's personal perspective on the issue. "Miss Emma," he said, "your proposal is comprehensive and well-reasoned, but I'm curious about your own experience. What would have convinced you to seek help sooner than you did?" Emma had anticipated this question and had given it considerable thought. "The biggest barrier was fear of making my situation worse," she replied honestly. "I needed to know that help was available, that it would be effective, and that seeking it wouldn't put me in greater danger. Most importantly, I needed to believe that someone would actually listen and take action." The council approved her proposal unanimously, and within 6 months, Emma found herself overseeing a program that was already helping dozens of people escape dangerous situations. She worked closely with Captain Whitmore, who had volunteered to train guards throughout the kingdom to recognize and respond appropriately to domestic violence situations. The program's success exceeded everyone's expectations. Word spread quietly through communities that help was available for those who needed it, and people began coming forward who had suffered in silence for years. Emma personally counseled many of them, sharing her own story when appropriate and helping them navigate the process of building new lives. One particularly memorable case involved a young mother named Catherine, who had been trapped in an abusive marriage for 5 years. She had 2 small children and no family support, making her situation even more precarious than Emma's had been. When Catherine finally found the courage to seek help, she was pregnant with her 3rd child and feared that her husband's violence would escalate further. Emma worked with Catherine for months, helping her develop a safety plan, connecting her with legal advocates, and eventually helping her relocate to a sanctuary in a distant town where her husband couldn't find her. When Catherine's baby was born healthy and safe, she sent Emma a letter expressing gratitude that brought tears to her eyes. "You gave me back my life," Catherine wrote. "But more than that, you gave my children a chance to grow up without fear. I will never be able to repay that gift." As Emma's 3rd anniversary at the castle approached, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. She now oversaw a program that operated in 5 different kingdoms, had trained hundreds of people to recognize and respond to domestic violence, and had directly helped more than 200 individuals escape dangerous situations. Her relationship with Captain Whitmore had also continued to deepen. Their friendship had gradually evolved into something more profound, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and a common commitment to helping others. When he finally asked her to marry him on a quiet evening in the castle gardens, Emma's answer came without hesitation. Their wedding was a small ceremony attended by the people who had become their chosen family: Sister Margaret, Master Thomas, several of Emma's colleagues from the castle, and many of the women Emma had helped through her program. It was a celebration not just of their love for each other, but of the community they had built around the mission of helping people in need. Standing at the altar in the castle chapel, Emma looked out at the faces of people whose lives had been touched by the work they were doing together. She thought about the frightened girl she had once been, unable to imagine a future beyond the fear and violence that had defined her daily existence. Captain Whitmore had kept his promise from that day in the market square when he had first offered help. He had not just rescued her from a dangerous situation, he had helped her discover her own strength and purpose. Together, they had created something that would continue helping people long after they were gone. As they exchanged vows, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude for the chain of events that had brought them together. Her decision to trust a stranger with her desperate need for help had not just saved her life. It had led to a calling that gave meaning to everything she had endured. The scared young woman who had once been afraid to ask for help had become someone others turned to in their darkest moments. Emma's story had come full circle, transformed from a tale of survival into one of purpose, love, and the power of human kindness to change lives in ways that ripple far beyond what anyone could imagine. Years later, when people asked Emma about the moment that changed her life, she would always return to that day in the market square when she had finally found the courage to make eye contact with someone who was willing to help. Sometimes, she would tell them, the bravest thing you can do is simply ask for the help you need.